Hi, my name's Luke Raven, and I'd like to share with you today a story, a tale from the fraud wars, you could put it, or a battle story from the early days in my career fighting fraud and financial crime. So buckle in, and this should hopefully be fun. You'll laugh, you'll cry. It'll be good. So gather around and I'll tell you a tale. It was a long time ago. It was too long ago to really count. Nearly 15 years ago now. Early in my days as a financial crime fighter, and I was working at one of Australia's big banks, and I was in the credit card and debit card fraud prevention department. So we worked around the clock. We were there to protect our customers from fraud and obviously protect the bottom line of the bank for fraud that we would potentially be liable for as well. So in that role, it was very interesting. It was a 24/7 sort of coverage role, and we got to, really impact people's lives and protect them from a lot of fraud, because a lot of bad guys were going after credit cards. They still do, but it was very interesting and great role. So one evening, when I went into work, I was always excited to go to work, but one evening I got a particularly interesting case that I'll walk you through now. So I was sitting there and the system alerted me. Essentially, we had this customer and her card was getting used really quickly. So we had a rule that triggered for high-risk transactions at velocity at certain merchants. So she was usually, she would use the PIN, but she wasn't using the PIN, or someone was using the card. They weren't using the PIN correctly. They were entering it wrong. They were using it at risky merchants. And when I compared this to her normal sort of account history and her profile, it became obvious pretty quickly that something wasn't right. The fraud frenzy was in the works. Somebody had this poor customer's card and was really attempting to hit it for all it was worth. They were trying to go to like liquor stores. They had tried it several times at ATMs and got the PIN wrong, and they were trying to use it without the PIN at tap and go using the chip functionality of the card. So not swipe the magnetic strip, but tap the chip, I should say. So someone had somehow got a hold of her card, and so I got this alert, and pretty standard. I thought, oh, this doesn't look right. So what I'll do is I'll place a block on the card, because it looked stolen. It didn't look like it was her. And I was right. I often was. We had some pretty good detection algorithms, and it wasn't, wasn't me being a sleuth. I can't oversell it. The system told me this is probably bad, and it was bad. It was a well-attuned system. So placed a block on the card. And then that's when the story gets kind of interesting, is the person who had the card, who was not our customer, tried to call in, because we were also a contact center. So we were taking phone calls from people 24/7 if they lost their card, or we were trying to confirm the specifics of transactions. We were available all year round for our customers. And on the back of the card, there was a number to contact us if there was any issues. And so that's actually what the fraudster decided to do. I think this is a pretty interesting strategy. You often find this idea that fraudsters are anonymous and you don't get to really deal with them, but he actually had the gumption to call a financial institution with the card and complaining about the card being rejected that he had stolen, essentially. So, he had that same idea of you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, I suppose. So it's an interesting strategy, that's for sure. So when I actually got the call, and immediately I knew something was not right, because of course our customer was a little old lady. It was a 60-plus-year-old lady, and obviously the card looked stolen. And this guy, he sounded like I sound speaking to you today. He didn't really make much attempt to, or he did make an attempt, but he wasn't very successful at disguising his voice. So, nor changing his mannerisms. He was very obviously annoyed that someone had gone to the effort of blocking this card that he had, and he wanted to spend money on. So I made the decision then and there This card is definitely not getting unblocked no matter what, even if he can pass security questions and everything else. There's no chance that this is the customer. This is actually a bad guy that I'm talking to on the phone. He's called in, which was, quite exciting and interesting and funny because he was trying to do a little old lady voice. But anyway, here was the problem. One of the problems that I had. We'd already tried. We'd done everything we could to protect her funds. We'd placed blocks on that card and the other cards in case he had more of them. We'd placed a call to make sure that she could hopefully get in contact with us, but we didn't actually have a process. We had a really good process for making sure that we identified the customer to make sure that they were who they said they were, and they were the customer. And that he couldn't pass that. That's good. That worked as intended. We didn't have any process or any training or any idea what to do if a fraudster actually decided to try and call in. And we knew that it was definitely not the customer. So I kind of had to make something up on the fly. And that's when I decided that I was going to make it a very frustrating experience for him. Not many people will admit in a customer service primarily role at a bank to deliberately frustrating someone on the phone. But that's what I decided to do. So it was interesting because there was sort of no guidance. This was happening at, I think, 2 a.m. in the morning sort of thing. And we just had to, there was nothing to do. So I wasn't going to disconnect the call and I wasn't going to unblock the card, and I wanted to see what would happen. Basically, I wanted to frustrate him. I can't, I probably shouldn't have put that as my number one priority on this list. But if I'm being honest, it was very fun to frustrate him because he was obviously trying to be a dodgy criminal scoundrel and take our customers' funds. And back then, as I am now, I was very much enthusiastic about depriving criminals of the proceeds of their crimes. So it was, I must admit, a joy to try and frustrate this fella. I wanted to waste his time and have him hang around where he was. He was calling from one of the stores, and so there's more surveillance footage. There's more chance that he's apprehended if he's just standing still. There's all sorts of analytics that we can collect through the phone. And I wanted to keep him on the line and keep him talking as long as possible, basically. I figured while he's doing this, he's not doing any harm, and we're potentially collecting some data we don't know. And he deserved it. But yeah, because our calls were recorded, my thinking was that we could provide this to the police and it could potentially help. And as I sort of noted, he's not causing any other harm while he's doing this. And potentially it's prolonging the time that he's in a surveilled and public area where the police may be able to apprehend him. So, I can't say it was like a well thought out plan, but it was what I decided to do. For want of a better process or a more formal process. So this is where it gets a bit fun. I got to make up fun questions to frustrate him that there's no conceivable way that a real customer would actually be able to answer, because I knew straight away that I was never going to unblock the card and I wasn't taking this call seriously. So I said, how many dollars and cents were there in your 6th transaction on Thursday morning 3 weeks ago? And he was very unhappy with how kind of crazy that question is, because I don't think there's a single person in the world that could probably answer this. And I for the record, I should state that this wasn't tied to any real questioning. I wasn't even looking at the activity from 6, the 6th transaction on a day. I was just asking him to see what would happen. And it basically, I actually thought he would give up really quickly. But what struck me is he was really persistent. He was not getting off that phone in his mind until he got the card unblocked. And I was not going to hang up the phone and I was not going to unblock the card. So we were kind of at an impasse, unstoppable force and immovable object, or unremovable block, perhaps. So all I could do was escalate. And I wasn't comfortable to say to him, I know you're a fraudster, I'm not going to do this. I didn't want to go that far. And lucky, because at the time, I wasn't necessarily cognizant of this, but that could be tipping off and could be very bad. But I didn't do that. What I did do, though, is I amped up how ridiculous the questions were to try and frustrate this guy even more. So, what's your favorite color? What's your dog's middle name? These kind of absurd questions that nobody would ever ask for a bank security question. And he would get very angry, and I'd put on my best customer service voice and say, look, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't choose these questions. These are the standard questions. You've set these up, ma'am. What's your star sign? And so he was becoming extremely irate. And the more irate he became, the funnier it kind of was for me in the moment. And the worst impression he was doing of a little old lady. So I can imagine that it would have been very funny to see. It was certainly very funny to be on the other end of. But there's a funny side to this story, but there's also a serious side. And this is where it starts to get a little bit serious. Is I had a colleague sitting with me. It was just the two of us because it was an overnight shift, and something absolutely crazy happened. The little old lady customer, for real, called in and got my colleague. So I had the fraudster on the phone. 1 meter away, my friend had the actual victim. Both of them on the phone to the bank about the same credit card at the same time. And, as interesting and kind of wacky as this situation is, it was actually a really serious situation, it turns out. Because this fraudster, as funny as the situation is so far, he was not a funny guy. He was a very serious guy. What he and his friends had done was steal a car and drive it through the front door of this lady's house. Luckily, they were not home, but they took all of their assorted electronics. They robbed their safe. They did all of this horrible stuff. And this is a very serious crime. This is a violent crime spree that this guy has been on. And he's now on the phone to me, imitating this customer who he has driven a car through the wall of her house. It was very insane to hear this happening. So look, my friend told me to put him on hold because we had to now really figure out what are we going to do. This is pretty serious. Again, it's 2 a.m. There's not much that can be done, but I put him on hold. We tried to figure out a game plan. I came back after a few minutes on hold, and I think he'd caught on at that stage that he was not getting the card unblocked, and he was wasting his time, so he was gone. And that there is a picture of roughly what I looked like. I was not happy that he got away, but maybe for the best because this was a violent criminal. Our customer was really happy. The reason it had taken her so long to get to us is because they were dealing with so much in their house. They were trying to resecure it. They had the police on site. They were, doing all sorts of stuff. They didn't even realize their cards were gone because that's the last thing you do, right? When you come home and your front wall is gone and your door's bashed in, and your electronics are all gone and your house has been rifled through, you don't immediately think, oh, my credit cards. So look, she was actually very relieved, and she was, as you would be, very upset by this whole turn of events. But this one little tiny part of her life had been secured, even though this man had and his associates had done this horrible thing and just completely and utterly violated her privacy and the safety of their home. So that was good. And also, because the police were there, we did tell her to tell them to send us a subpoena, and we'll be able to provide the police recording, the phone recording to the police. So it's 100% true. This story is nuts. This story always gets me, backslaps and beers at the bar when I speak with all of the fraud and financial crime fighters, because it's kind of crazy. But one thing that it really underscored for me is that those who commit the fraud, it's easy to put them in this box of being anonymous and just existing out in the world. And we know they're there, the fraudsters, but we never really put a face to the name, and we never really think of the victim. And this was one of the most brazen attacks that I can imagine. Calling the bank doesn't seem so extreme if you're willing to drive a car through someone's home. But that's the kind of people we can be dealing with. There's an idea that white collar crime doesn't necessarily impact anybody, and it's not true. Organized criminals can be very dangerous and do these horrific things, and this is a good example of that, I think. The good news, I think, and the call to action for everyone is, with good process and staff, I don't know how good I am for doing this. Maybe it's a naughty thing I did, but it didn't get through, and it's because I cared so much about protecting the cardholder. We can save victims a lot of heartache, and I'll always remember how grateful this lady was that one small part of her life had remained secured. He couldn't penetrate every level of her financial and household. And get absolutely everything. Someone had been on her side and watching out for her. And maybe if you too are lucky, you can make a nasty criminal spend 20 minutes on the phone impersonating a little old lady. That's my fraud war story. Thanks for joining me. I'm Lee Graven.